Welcome back to the Politics of Survival. I'm Tara Reade, I'm your host, and I have someone really special with me today from all the way down under. And she's an author, she's an activist, she's a healing guru in my eyes. Her name is Gloria Masters, and she has quite a story to tell. And without further ado, Gloria, thank you so much for joining Politics of Survival and talking about your book and all the things that you do. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Tara. I'm just so delighted to be here. Honoured, actually, to be here. Thank you.
Oh, the honor's mine. So I read excerpts of your book and I fell in love with your writing right away. It's very direct, it's very descriptive, and wow, you went through a lot. So could you talk a little bit about your book and tell us more and how people can find it?
Okay, sure. So I wrote a book about the first 16 years of my life. I was born into child sex slavery, actually. So right from the start, my father made sure I was fit for purpose, youngest of 4 children. So my history included the initial rape by him at age 4, and then being trained by his mother and one of his sisters to be the best, in their words, child prostitute I could be. They made a lot of money out of me during those initial years, and then I started getting trafficked to gangs here in New Zealand, to a gentleman's club, which I can't name for legal reasons, and performed in well over 100 pornographic movies, which were then sold and distributed. I think some may have even reached the States. And I had many abortions performed on me at my grandmother's hands. And to be honest, I am just so grateful to be alive. There were times when I thought I wouldn't. The very worst time in my life was the age of 11, when my parents chose to separate, and I chose to live with my father, which I know defies belief, Tara. Mm-hmm. But I was bribed and tricked, and I wanted a horse. I'm sure you can. And so I thought that horse would save me. And of course, there never was any horse. But what happened from that point was the horror really picked up. So, yeah, I think being abandoned and neglected from my mother and left in that house for those 18 months was without doubt the worst part of my life. I was made to continue with my father and seeing him until the age of 16, at which point I had the choice, so I chose never to again. So yes, that's my story, and I'm very lucky to be here, and I'm very grateful to be here.
How did you finally escape the brutality of all of that? Was there a person, or did you somehow access resources at a certain age, or how were you able to get out, so to speak?
Well, there was no one. This was in the 60s. I was born in 1960. In those days, what happened was people believed that a man was there, ruled his house, and it was his kingdom, and no one interfered. And even, I think it was the 80s in New Zealand before police were allowed to become involved in domestic disputes in New Zealand. Up until
1980s.
It was the 1980s before that law was passed. But unfortunately, we were a good old Catholic family, and there was lots of pedophilia and lots of pedophile rings through that Catholic church, as well, as we are hearing more and more today. So yes, there was no escape, and I didn't have any safe person I could go to. my mother enabled it by turning a blind eye, and actually she was your classic narcissist. She wasn't interested in me. Any pleas fell on deaf ears. She was absent more than not. Really, neither of them should have been parents.
You know, the name of your book, On Angel's Wings, is very powerful. How did you come up with that title, and what drew you to that?
Yes. So what drew me to that was I realised, and of course, looking back, we know everything, don't we? I realised that I'd always had them around me, and that through those 16 years, they were my constant companion. So as children do, and as adults do during acts of rape and sexual violence, I dissociated, and they were often around me and showing me signs that they were there. And so I realised that what got me through was not anything external, but actually that internal world. So I'm very grateful that it is On Angel's Wings. The subtitle is My Flight from Trauma to Grace, because I got through the trauma to a state of grace, which I'm so grateful for.
How can our listeners access your book? Because you are in New Zealand. Is it available on Amazon and on all those places?
Absolutely. Look, the postage for you guys over there is horrendous. I've tried posting books to the US and it costs me $30 a book to send it, let alone. So it's with it. So Amazon.com, it's in Kindle, it's in paperback. I did an audio version of it. So you've got all options really with that. Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. And, you know, again, I've just been so impressed with your ability to heal and a lot of your journey. You know, you and I talked a little bit amongst ourselves. And as you know, I went through child abuse as well as, you know, in an adult, not to the level of what you went through as a child, and I never experienced trafficking, but I did experience assault and sexual assault and domestic violence. And, you know, through that though, there were people in my lives that stepped in, you know, like my brother, Michael, was very protective of me and stepped in and was very supportive of my younger brother, Colin. But I noticed reading, you know, some of your you didn't have that. And I'm just in awe of how you were able to navigate that as a child, but then as an adult. What do you now have a support system, and how did you build that around yourself? Or, you know, a bigger question is, how were you ever even able to trust, you know, after your trust was so violated by the people close to you?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. So look, I think in terms of support around me, my safe place was school back then. I never wanted to leave. The nuns used to have to kick me off the school grounds. As I got older and became a teenager, my peer group was everything. They didn't know it, but they were. I used to study their behaviour and their families and how they interacted and try and copy that, because I didn't really have a safe or a positive framework to follow. Later years, the memories didn't come to me. I repressed all this, Tara, till I was 32.
Wow.
And then they came at me. Well, the mind's an amazing thing, because I liken it to a car accident. If you have a car accident, chances are you're not going to remember all the detail for a while, because your mind will protect you.
Right.
So you imagine 16 years of traumatic, evil, abuse and physical attacks and emotional torture. You know, as a child, I couldn't stay in my body and live that, and then have breakfast with the abusers the next day. I just couldn't. So in terms of support for me, my mind was great in that. And then as an adult, once I started recovering the memories, then I've been in decade. I've been in therapy for decades, and I needed to. And look,
Yes.
I'm largely there, and that's why I've written the book. I've started writing my second book on how I got through, because that is I just want to be able to give back and provide CSA survivors some ways of navigating through to wholeness and healing. So
Very good. Yeah, and to that point, what is the name of your second book, by the way, or is it still in progress?
well, it's Flight Path to Healing.
Okay. And is that released soon or?
Well, I'm working on it, she said convincingly. I am working on it, and yes, I'm hoping to have that released. I'll make contact with you about that before then, but potentially within the next 4 months. So I'm working now, but yes, yeah.
And regarding the healing and whatnot, two things. I've talked to a couple of trauma experts because of, my own healing path, which is meandering. And I don't think it's a linear one, right? It is what it is. But one thing with the trauma expert talked to me about, you just kind of referenced with the car accident. He talked about the memory, and also Lou Godbold, who's a Weinstein survivor and also a trauma expert. She discussed this, that the memory is, when it comes to that kind of trauma, stores it in a different place. So that's why it's so fragmented, and when I was coming forward about what happened to me, I remembered bits, pieces, and odd things like smells and sounds and very sensory things. And I was like so frustrated because it wasn't linear.
Yes.
And then, the trauma expert explained, and then, what I found is too, in sleep, like after not talking about it for a long time, I would have the nightmares, the post-traumatic stress. And then some details would come back. I would choose to share or not share them. But the point is that it does feel like looking through shattered glass. That's how I've always described it. Whereas like other memories that are just normal memories have a different feel. Do you agree with that? Or do you have a different experience?
Absolutely. And I'm interested in what you talk about, the sensory memory, because I used to wake up, not to horrify people, but with the taste of semen in my mouth or the taste of blood in my mouth.
Right.
And I would think, what's this about? Or a certain image of the way someone walked would have me in fight, flight, or freeze.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So the visual, the smell, a certain smell, I couldn't explain it. Even driving past or walking past certain areas today, I struggle with certain areas of Auckland because of where I was trafficked to.
So brutal. When people think of New Zealand, they don't think of this. And I have to say, I had my own bias. Like, you always think of New Zealand as this sort of haven, like it's just this sort of magical land where everyone's nice and you have this nice prime minister. And I don't know, like we have a very skewed view of it in the United States. And Australia, hear about things going on but in New Zealand, I don't know, there's a public perception that's quite different in the West of the reality of it. And what people need to understand is that human trafficking happens everywhere, and sexual assault does not honor boundaries. It crosses all socioeconomic and cultural and geographical lines. But what struck me reading your story is that there were people, because it's not a huge country, but there were people in this community that behave that way. And did any criminal adjudication or any kind of justice come?
So, yeah, and as you delve deeper, but you'll need to read it chapter at a time, Tara, because it's a bit much to read the whole thing. So look, in answer to your question about a couple of things. New Zealand is a small country, but that doesn't mean that it isn't made up of what you would see across the US or across the world.
Right.
There's good and there's evil. In our stats, we have a range of stats. Police tell me 1 in 3 is not unlikely for child sexual survivors. So if we do the maths, we have over 5 million in our country. That's over 1.5 million people.
Wow.
So let's not fool ourselves. And these are, I'm talking men as well as women. So the reality is it still goes on today. We have huge pedophile rings here. There's been a lot that's being uncovered more and more. And unfortunately, that's true. And I'm sorry, I've forgotten your second part.
Oh, the restorative justice question. Was there any real restorative justice? And is, for instance, you couldn't say the name of the men's club, but like, are these shutting down? Now that you have a different prime minister and more focus on these kinds of issues, is anything changing or not?
More is coming to light in the media. The government are fully aware, or as informed as they can be. I think there are so many social issues here that the funding and the spotlight is not quite what it could be. For instance, I was meant to be on a TV interview which got pushed and pushed and pushed and then cancelled. The reason the producer gave me is, our viewers don't want to actually see that.
Oh, I see. They didn't want to have the conversation.
Sweep under the rug, yeah. But that doesn't stop people like me, because I'm determined to get the word out and spotlight this and actually help other survivors, because the shame doesn't belong to us, Tara, and it never did.
No, it never does. You're right. And I liked that line from your book too. And, I wanted to ask you about the men perpetrating some of this, the elites, so to speak. Did because you came forward with your story, at a later age, 32, not in your 20s, but, how has it affected your life in a personal way? I mean, are you able to move forward with a family and live in your community, or did you experience the being ostracized, which you've watched me get ostracized on a global level because of who my perpetrator was, right? But
yeah,
did you experience that, or were you more accepted? What was the?
No. Oh no, not at all. I lost my whole family over this. Because how dare I speak out? You can imagine, I'm sure these labels were attributed to you, unfortunately. Deluded, liar, black sheep, evil. We could come up with a whole list.
Well, they slut shame you, they clash shame me. I don't know if they would do that with you, but it was the gamut. Yeah, it's silly. Well, they did one thing they haven't done to you. They called me a Russian asset. So that was
true. You got that one, didn't you?
That was the first label I was given, was a Russian spy. So I was like, I didn't even know how to deal with that one. And I was like, what? I grew up on a farm in Wisconsin and from California. So it was so silly.
You never stood a chance, my friend.
No. But back to you, so you received that back. But did you also receive some support from women's groups, or did they abandon you and kind of leave you on your own?
No, people that didn't know me, they were in two camps. But anyone that knows me, you can see truth in front of your eyes. And why would I bother?
Yeah,
exactly. Why would I bother even bringing it up? I didn't want anything. All I wanted maybe from my mother was a hug, or from my siblings, some recognition or affirmation, nothing. But in answer to your question, because you did ask and I didn't answer you, the restorative thing. So I did take it to the police. They were amazing, and I'm still in touch with a detective today. They were at pains to point out two things. One, they have yet to meet a pedophile who will ever admit what they did. Reduced sentence, and there's no pedophile that will ever say, I did this and I like children. The second thing is the burden of proof could not be met. They had no issue with me, the police, back then in my 30s. They said, look, you're credible, we could put you on the stand, but man, you would be destroyed. You can relate, Tara. You would be destroyed because there's only you, and it's your word against others. So does that mean they didn't believe me? Not at all.
Right.
But what it meant was that burden of proof couldn't be met. And, I'm proud of the fact that I have stuck to my story, and that I will continue to keep pushing this out there, because all it takes is one person to change a life, a child's life. All it takes is one person to say, that's not on, or I see that, or I hear you.
So for our listeners, what are some resources that are available in your community and then maybe internationally that you know of, if any, that you recommend?
One of the things I've started to do is create. It's a YouTube channel and a podcast called Handing the Shame Back.
Yay. Okay.
So every week I have a survivor on the show. I interview them, and we hand the shame back. And it's just a forum and a dedicated channel, actually, for men and women in Aotearoa and across the world, to have a safe place to share, to talk about what they're doing now, to actually live and reclaim who they are. And I'm very humbled that people have that. So
good.
It's called Handing the Shame Back.
So you and I are, geographically quite far apart, but spiritually quite close together. So how did you come to know my story and about what happened to me? How did you?
Well, it was interesting because I think you're friends with Eliza Blue.
Yes, I did her podcast. Yes.
Yes. And I listened to that and I thought, oh my gosh, Tara. And then I realized what a warrior you are, and a champion for this. And I was so humbled by your story, and I saw what you had to undergo. So I started looking at what was out there about you, and just saw the whole machine. There was the big political machine, and there was you, and I just felt a kindred spirit, and I felt such affinity with you.
Well, thank you. I appreciated your support. It came at an interesting time because, as you know, and you and I were talking back and forth, I was working for RT. I could only get work internationally, and then RT was censored and banned in the UK and other places in Australia as well. In New Zealand, I assume you can't get it. And you now can find it on Odyssey and places like that. But my podcast and the writings I was doing, everything, like my work stopped. So, and I was doing work with, it had to do with, raising up survivors, but also talking about geopolitics and, things that I'm interested in professionally. And it was quite a bit of disappointment. So I appreciate your patience as I navigated going out on my own, so to speak, with no no producer like RT. And I had a lovely experience with them. They handled what happened to me with a lot of dignity and grace, and saw me as a whole person, not just the person coming forward about Joe Biden. And what I like about what you're doing, and what struck me about your story and your book, is just how you want to focus the energy into helping others heal, and by sharing your journey. And one thing I want our listeners to kind of hear about is, you talked about going inward, and that's how you found your strength. But here's this thing where the church is kind of complicit, not kind of, but is complicit with this horrible thing. How did you hold on to any kind of spiritual faith in the face of that? I'm just curious, and I know our listeners will be.
Yeah, look, as a child, I didn't have, I was a child, and what children do, we play, we're inquisitive, we explore, we do all that. So back in those days, it was be seen and not heard unless you were wanted for some purpose. So in my world, I was always out making daisy chains, or sitting on a fence pretending it was a horse with a stick, all that sort of thing. Giddy up, all that sort of thing. So my mind protected me, and I know my angels were there, because one of my earliest memories was of being thrown into an old apple crate. by my father, and then him nailing another one on top of me as a small child, that defies belief. But he was furious with me, and I was in this apple crate, and of course you can see through the slits between the wood, and I don't know how long I was in there, but it was scary, and it was dark, and it was lonely, and I don't know, my first real memory of my angels, I would have been about 3.5, was in that apple crate and looking out, Tara, and something caught my eye, and it was these little angels, and their little wings were there, and they were playing, and I felt like they wanted me to play too. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was my beginning of, wow, and that's where I would go.
Your imagination, you would go in there in that safe place.
Yeah, and that's what kept me. And then in the years, I was left with my father for 18 months before I was removed. Right. That's an interesting point for your readers, and I'll talk about that. And then during that 18 months, I was the only female child in that house. Mm-hmm. That's when the hell really began for me. I would often look out at the moon and see it smiling and think it's smiling at me, or I would just make patterns in the sky, or I just found a way to do this. I don't think I could have kept sane had I not, alongside being able to go to school. But when 18 months in, so I was 12 and a half, there were times I tried 3 times during those 18 months to end my life as a child, 11 to 12 and a half. Well, there was no escape for me. It was really dark. But I walked home from school one day, aged 12 and a half, and I could hear laughter, and it was an early day because the nuns had something they were doing. And I could hear laughter, and it was my father in a bedroom with a woman, and something just froze in me, and I just ran, and I ran all the way to my mother's house. And for the first time, she looked at me and asked, "What's wrong?" And I was in such shock because I thought that was my job, you see. That's how I'd been conditioned.
Oh, wow. Mm-hmm.
So I felt betrayed and traumatized and just an absolute shock. She rang the local priest, etc., and they said, "Get her out of that house. It's not safe for her to be there with an adulterer."
Tara, oh my goodness. Yeah, I remember reading, that.
Yeah.
Not the fact that there was sexual assault, but there was an adulterer. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Amazing. So apparently all the other rapes, beating, abuse, trafficking, pornographic material being sold out of a nightclub in Auckland, all of that sort of thing could go on. He got the first Pontiac in New Zealand, one of the first 4 in New Zealand in 1968 due to the money he made out of me. So it's a huge story. But the point being, I could escape at 12 and a half, but I was made to go back every second weekend. And can I tell you, that felt harder.
Yeah, I would imagine. Because you had some sort of safe place during the gap.
12 days, yeah. And then those 2 days, the horror. I was never the same child that walked back home to my mother after that.
Have any of your extended family made peace with you or reached out to you or apologized to you? Anything? Nothing? Not you? I'm talking about extended.
No. Oh, no. My mother was a very convincing, or is she still alive, but a convincing narcissist. Very clever, very bright woman. But most people are fooled by that. So I've just brought shame on the family sort of thing, and how dare I? But so look, that's fine. The sad thing for me is my mother could have healed all of this by accepting the truth and actually, making it right. But she chose not to. And that's her journey. But maybe mine is to shine a light on all of us out there and say, hey, guys, you believed.
Yeah, and I think that's important. I shared in my book, as you saw, Rose McGowan did my foreword, and she was one of the first people to call me, even family members didn't call me. And then she just said, I believe you. And, she's a survivor herself and she stands by survivors. And those 3 words meant so much. Like, it just was such a relief. Yeah.
Power. Because look at what you and I have had to go through, because people don't want to believe. It's not that they don't believe, they don't want to.
Right, because it I think it shatters their belief systems. And in the case of my case, it's someone who's considered by some beloved, or he's like does good things for women, and he doesn't, and that's it's a world where many things are true at once. And it's like what you mentioned with your mother being very clever and very, she has qualities that allow her to move in the world and do the things she does. So it's not, I think sometimes even in America, I don't know how New Zealand culture is, but in America, there seems to be almost a cartoon, like good, bad, whatever. It's just very binary, instead of, many things are true at once. Someone can be very charming and very, engaging and do actually good things, but then do very bad things as well, and very morally bankrupt things. And, I think we both experienced that. And for you, to have a parent betrayal and grandparent betrayal, like I have good memories of my grandma, my nan. And yours were, brutal. Like when I read, it was just, the coldness and the hostility and I couldn't believe it. It was just, yeah. So you turned out to be a very loving, giving person, soul, and give of yourself. How did you find that space within yourself to heal that? How did that come about?
Well, I think, if you think back to how we start as children, we're all loving, we're all joyful, we're all excited about life and exploring life, and innocent and honest. That's children. And I think there was always a part of my personality that, I don't know where I got it from, Tara, but was able to think about other people, was able to be kind and, have empathy, I guess. And that was my natural base, if you like. Yeah. Then all this horror happened, and I think we can either go one of 2 ways. Some people can become very hard by this and become very insular. And I'm very grateful I was able to heal enough to reclaim the truth of who I am. And that's what I'm focusing on in my next book, actually, is let's find the true you. Let's bring us back to the true selves, because I think we're all there. And I think that's our gift. I always had it. The one thing they couldn't touch was my mind. And that was one thing I realised one day when I was having a dreadful experience with my father and brother, and they wouldn't let me speak. And I could only act like a dog, is how they wanted, so I could yell, pour wine or beg or whatever. And for some reason in that instant, I realised I don't have to speak. So from that point on, I chose not to speak unless I chose to. And in my small childlike way, that gave me power. And I thought, they can't touch that because I can control that. And that has stayed with me. So they could do what they liked physically, and they did. But the point was, there was always a little part of my head that was safe, and I just kept a bubble of light around that. They couldn't touch that. So I think that's quite powerful for me as well. Yeah. Light will always overcome dark. And you asked me earlier about trust, and It's been a huge challenge for me, Tara, because both men and women were my abusers and my enablers and their enablers. Both tricked, both hurt, both taunted. And when you're tricked so many times, it's actually really hard then to believe anybody.
Right.
So it has carried through. It's been a very hard thing for me to trust. And look, I do now, because I think I've been fortunate enough to have done the work to enable me to sense. And now I trust my instinct 100.
Yeah, I mean, and it is hard. Trust is hard for me too. As you know, a lot of people, there was a lot of tricks used while I came forward. So I recently just had someone very, very well known who I trusted and ended up kind of giving me an ultimatum about some political issue. And I chose not to, go with their views. And I don't respond well to ultimatums. I find that that it immediately breaks my trust. If someone gives me an ultimatum, like, you have to do this in order to be believed, I'm like, you're not someone I want to deal with ever again. Bye. Yeah, exactly. Bye-bye. Yeah. And I think my patience level for that has diminished immensely. But I wanted to get back to the healing portion for our listeners, and many listeners that I have are survivors themselves. And one of the things we're talking about and we're learning about is healing for sexual assault survivors and human trafficking survivors is a little different than other trauma. Talk therapy doesn't really work. I do that, but it's not it takes more, right? And one of the things Lou Godbold had talked about was somatic healing and, equine. Well, I was involved with equine therapy, and she kind of explained the brain with horses. And you mentioned earlier you're enthusiastic with horses. Yeah. And horses, their parasympathetic nervous system will match ours. They're prey animals. They're not like a dog. Dogs are predators. Horses are, parasympathetic. So they actually can hear our heartbeat many feet away. They can hear it. So if our heartbeat's elevated, they go on alert, and horses that are good at equine therapy have this calming effect, and our heartbeat starts matching theirs, and we start calming. And so when we touch them, pet them, it actually has a calming effect.
Wow.
And I've worked with veterans from war with PTSD, and then children who had various different traumas. And one child that was nonverbal, that would only talk to the horse, only speak to the horse, and nothing else during the day or night. That was the only time it was verbal. And it's amazing how that is so helpful. So there's lots of ways to heal. So I was wondering if you could share some of what you've discovered. Like I've shared that with my listeners before, but what are your discoveries?
Wow. So look, many things. I find talking therapy is useful. The biggest healing for me was actually spiritual healing, and that's where I would read the works of like Deepak Chopra, Wayne Dwyer was one, Eckhart Tolle, Michael Singer, and I just bring in that whole spiritual component with me, because that has helped me enormously. The other thing is things like yoga, like that yoga healing. You can do some yoga healing, so you're moving through the body, because the body never forgets. Right. The body stores memory. Meditation. I wouldn't be the person I am today without meditation. Right. Hey, I fought it for years. And then I realized people would say to me in the last 5 or so years, you always seem so calm. And I think it's the meditation has really helped calm my central nervous. Breathing, because I'm a bit of a shallow breather, me. So, actually learning to, even at traffic lights, just breathe in, hold it, breathe out. Right. Something like that actually can change our brain chemistry, believe it or not. Writing a journal, for people like you and I that like writing anyway, Tara, just writing. Write. And I think I so support what you're saying. I think for all of us, there's lots of modalities. One size does not fit all. You'll
Right.
know if it's you because you feel it. Being in the sea, if I'm in the sea, oh my gosh, I just feel different just being in the water.
Right, me too. Yeah, I agree. Water is very healing for some. Some people don't find it. I do. That's where my safe place is. It's actually in the water. Yeah.
And
Or on a
believe it
walk.
or not, it's called negative ions, people. It's not positive ions, it's the negative ions from the salt water.
Yeah.
It's healing.
Yeah, it is. There
And
was this place I went to in the Pacific Northwest that has waterfalls, and I just sat in the pool just listening to the waterfalls for almost a day with a friend of mine. And it was one of the best days. And I still remember, and I pull on that memory when I'm having a really hard time because, it's like you said, the negative eons just relieve that stress. It's so good. Yeah.
oh, one other thing for people, if people wonder why we all love the beach so much, what it is after 20 minutes, our brain bright waves change from beta to alpha. So they change after 20 minutes, the rhythm.
Of the ocean.
Yeah, so that's why people don't know why they're drawn, but they're drawn because it calms everything down. So
Ah.
there's 450 techniques there, Tara. Take your pick.
There you go. Well, I mean, our listeners are going to be grateful because, and if they can't find an ocean, there's a lake or a waterfall, and those work, and rivers or creeks. But I think going into nature is quite healing, and it's a meditation unto itself, like a walking meditation. And yeah.
Even walking, isn't it funny? You mentioned walking. I love walking. And I think as a child, I used to walk for miles. And it was just getting into that rhythm. And I think it actually helped that whole brain functioning as well. So yeah, lots to choose from.
So now in this place in your journey, do you feel safe? And do you feel like, I know healing is not linear. It's very much a circular kind of meandering path, if you will. But do you feel safe where you are in your life now? And what do you see before you?
Yes, thank you. Great question. Yes, I do. 99% of the time, sometimes I'll get triggered by a group of men behind me or someone that I think might be following me, but that's more rare. But isn't it interesting? And I take that as vindication or validation, actually. Yes, this happened to me, and yes, I got through it. So because yeah, we've been disbelieved, and where to look. I'm so grateful. I've got my website, gloriamasters.com. Every week on my podcast channel, I release, as well as a guest interview, a 5-minute blog. I write every week. My last one was on hypervigilance. So it's just little techniques for our fabulous survivors out there. It's just my thoughts on what hypervigilance is. You and I talked earlier about some of the commonalities in terms of languaging that's used, but as well as for our survivors, words like triggers. So we've got stuff on there. We've got stuff on dissociation, hypervigilance, hope even for a survivor can sometimes be hard to find. So
yeah.
I'm just excited to keep writing and keep sharing, and I'd love to start doing some speaking. And
Oh, well, good. I mean, you have a lovely presence, and I'm really delighted that you were able to share with our listeners your voice, your story, and some of your healing ideas and your path, because really it is not a one size fits all. It's very much a journey when you try to heal, and as far as my final, I kind of wanted to close out with, you mentioned your website. People can find you. Where can they find your book again? Just the name of the book and about that.
Sure. So a couple of things, guys. Everything can be found on gloriamasters.com.
Okay.
But for people who wish to purchase the book over in the States or Europe, probably better to go to Amazon.com. Otherwise, the postage is going to be horrendous for them.
Okay.
So that would be my gift to you. And the only other thing is handing the shame back, which is the channels I'm using to try and support our fellow survivors out there.
All right. Well, I'll definitely share that link. If you send that to me, handing the shame, and we'll get that link up on the podcast as well. And, I would ask my listeners to go and support Gloria and go check out her website and all the ways she can help, and her book, which is marvelous. And, I know for my listeners, sometimes these subject matters are intense and hard, and if you're a survivor, you kind of tend to want to avoid, but like, if you can find it in yourself, it's really important we listen to each other. And it's really important we lift each other's stories and histories, I should say, not stories, but histories of what we endured and how we heal. And it's how we can move forward. Because denying and turning away isn't the answer. It's really integrating, the trauma into ourselves that can provide real, deep, transformational healing. Don't you think, Gloria?
Absolutely. And for your listeners out there, even one person finding their voice is enough to free several others. Why? Because it gives others permission to speak. And that's what this is. We need to start handing that shame back. We need people to feel if they can find their voice, we lessen it more and more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Your insights and your beautiful presence today. It was such an honor. And to all my listeners, thank you for tuning in here every other Friday, the Politics of Survival with Tara Reade, and look up Gloria Masters, gloriamasters.com. And her book is just wonderful and you will love it. So please listen to it and to the audio or read it. Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.